Hello and welcome to another discussion in the SF Masterworks reading group. This is a series where we talk about the books in the SF Masterworks collection in the order they were published as Masterworks. Today's discussion is going to be on The Martian Timeslip by Philip K. Dick. And we usually read one of these a month. The book's coming up for the next 3 months. If you'd like to read along with us, are The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester for September, Stand on Zanzibar by John Brunner for October, and The Dispossessed by Ursula K. Le Guin for November. I'm really excited about that one. If you couldn't tell by the change in the tone. With me, I have the usual group of friends. Jared, could you start us off with introductions?
Sure. I'm Jared. I run the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel and also on podcast Speculative Speculation and other fine podcast on pagechewing.com. Susanna?
Hello, my name is Susana Imaginario. I'm the author of the Timelessness series, and I run the Den of the Weird YouTube channel.
Awesome. And I'm the host of a podcast, Books Undone. I'm also a page chewing member, and I write interactive stories through Unearthed Stories. And my latest book was released in July. So happy to be here.
Very nice. So, Martian Timeslip, this is our second Philip K. Dick book, and we have a little spreadsheet we use to rate these books so we can track how things go as we make our way through this list. And we have ratings all over the place for this one. So, this should be an interesting discussion. Does anybody want to start with some high level thoughts?
I can start with probably a controversial thought. Why is this sci-fi? Just because it's set in Mars doesn't make it sci-fi. This could have easily been set, in pioneer times, in the desert somewhere in the US. I mean, and how optimistic that it was written in '64 and it's supposed to be '94. So in 30 years, you would have an established settlement in Mars, already decaying, kind of. There was no need to be sci-fi. Just setting it in Mars doesn't make it sci-fi. I read it almost as a pioneer story. So that's my unpopular opinion.
Can I chime in? So at the start I thought the same, but for example, if we look at the definition of sci-fi from Analog Magazine, they say that a sci-fi story has to be enabled by science, right? And this is based on science from 1964. It's actually psychology. It uses 3 theories that were later debunked, and I think that's mostly why it's classified as sci-fi. But besides that, it's not really, there is no hard science, only psychology. And that was my main problem with this story, because it was written in 1964. Psychology at that time was like a baby. It was very in the works. And the 3 theories it uses, which is autism as an acquired disease, autism as a childhood onset of psychosis, and the theory of the refrigerator mothers, they were the 3 of them, they were debunked later on, and they are now quite offensive. We really know that that's not the case for those 3 things. So I found it quite interesting how a book that was based on psychology of 1964 became unscientifically offensive as science and knowledge of the human psyche evolved. There are also a few quite racist references. The Blickmen, it's very blatant what they are to me, a reference to Black people and the setup of the United States in the 1960s, which was still segregated, and there is a clear view of them as slaves and nothing more than slaves. And I think there is a whole wordplay with regards to how the main character refers to his quote unquote tame person that ends up killing him, basically, or setting him in a quest that ends up killing him. But besides that, yeah, I really couldn't like the book because of the theories it relies on. And yeah, that's mostly it. I had to give it 1 star because Goodreads didn't allow me to give it 0.
Yeah. Um, yeah, it was definitely extremely dated book. And the comment you made about the refrigerator mom thing stood out to me right away because that was like right in
Yeah.
the first page or what have you.
And
And
both mothers of autistic childs in this book, they have master's degrees, they are professional women, and they are like the stereotype of the refrigerator mother theory.
mhm. Yeah, and that was a prevalent theory in the 50s, especially um, when it was almost like a what do you call it? A conspiracy to have not have women be educated because of that very thing right there, that they wouldn't be able to care for their children right and all that stuff. And like you said, it thoroughly debunked. But the and it's interesting because you don't know how much of PKD is in the books and how much he is putting out through his characters, and how much of that is him, or how much of that is him making his characters people you don't like, and it's hard to determine that just from the writing. It's so because I like the beginning of the book really bothered me with that kind of terminology and that kind of stuff, because I've lived with autistic kids and I know how autistic kids are, and they're nothing like this, because this is such a cookie cutter portrayal, and it took me a while to get over that. Once you do, I think there's actually a pretty cool story in here, as far as there's some there's some interesting stuff as far as like the plotting, and the and some of the on some of the actual just um story beats, and he hits all those pretty well, and he has a a fairly exciting ending as far as what happens at the end, and the time slipping. The name of the book, Martian Time Slip, is actually on the nose, really on the nose. It was more literal than I thought it was going to be, and so I found that interesting, and it 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 does, and it plays with the it probably, I don't know if it plays with it or if it actually invented the stereotype that an autistic kid can have these superpowers, that uh that just changes that's involved in the story and the narrative, and actually affects it in that manner. And because we've seen that come out later on in some movies and stuff like that, where it's quite nonsensical. But the once I got past my initial ugh, reaction, then I because he is a good writer, and he knows how to put words on the paper and make the story flow, and make it the actual story enjoyable, even if you don't like some of the premises he set up. And I agree with you guys that the whole optimistic 30 years in the future living on Mars was really not typical for science fiction writers in the 60s and 50s. A lot of them had much further out um, projections. So that was it was interesting, and I came around to the story eventually, and I did like some of the characters. Obviously not Arnie; he's the biggest jerk in the world, but some of the characters you end up liking, and so I gave it a okay. I was like, oh, it was okay. Yeah.
That's something I wanted to follow up on the optimism that you said. It's, I think, at the same curious because on the one hand, he's still obsessed with themes from that time, like the German view or their opinions on the communism and so on. But at the same time, it's like he was so influenced by the space career that was happening during the 60s that he said, like, oh, at this rhythm, we may be in Mars. And it's
Yeah.
now almost like period sci-fi because it is in the past and we are nowhere near it.
Yeah.
Well,
Sorry. Go ahead, Susanna.
no, go ahead. You haven't said anything yet.
Oh no. So I think I agree with things that all of you have said. There are, I did end up enjoying the book quite a lot, but yes, there are things that like you sort of snag over and it's like, "Oh, no, what do you mean? Why that word I don't think means what how you're describing it and so on." Like I think the whole schizo thing, lumping all psychological illnesses as schizophrenia, I think that was that a Philip K. Dick thing or was that a 60s psychology thing? Do you guys know?
I do think that at that time in the DSM, which is Diagnostic and Statistic Manual, they were on version number 2. They had quite a few of psychosis things that were mentioned here, like for it being like a temporal thing that you will get only for a period of time, and the theory of the autism being the childhood onset of it was also on the DSM, and that book is one of the books that psychologists use to diagnose people.
Got it.
There are some, but just to give you a frame of reference, there are some considerations that are put up that who accepts as a diagnostic, for example, complex PTSD, so complex post-traumatic stress disorder, but the DSM, which is currently on version 5, still doesn't accept it. So it has never been the most up-to-date thing.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. So it
I
I had to. Sorry.
so disagree. But I'll leave that. It's not related to the book. I would rather not discuss psychology because we'll stay here all evening. I am a psychologist, but and I studied that a lot. And but yeah, I promised myself not to get into an argument, so we'll continue from there. I just think it's wrong.
The DSM.
No, the DSM is fine. The interpretation of everything. And in the book is a product of his time. I don't know. It doesn't look like he did a lot of research, but it is based on the understanding of these mental, if you call mental or psychological issues at the time. 50 years from now, I'm pretty sure they're gonna look back and hopefully, have a few things to say about things like gender ideology, for example. Things evolve, and hopefully for the better. But in that regard, it was, I wouldn't say it was a good use of the understanding of psychology at the time, because I still think as a science fiction, no. As speculative fiction, sure. As a fantasy, sure. It could have most turned into a magic system. Like Jared was saying, from then on, there's so many superhero characters and special characters that are based on things that could be considered mental illness. And yeah, it was onto something, but lacked depth, I think. It was just using the terms to build the story, and it kind of like with Blade Runner or Do Android Dreams with Electric Sheep. It lacked empathy. It was concepts, ideas on a page. It lacked the empathy, the depth to kind of make them connect, to make them work, to sorry, I digressed. but it's not a very empathetic book throughout. But I'm not going to say that it's wrong or based on wrong science. It was a science at the time. Now it's not that it's correct. It's just that it evolved things. We understand the mind better now. We have better technology. We have more accumulated knowledge, etc.
Mhm.
Yeah, that makes sense. Chris, we were just talking about the psychology aspects of the book,
Yep.
and everybody shared some high-level thoughts. So I don't know. Do you want to give us yours about the book?
Yeah, high level thoughts about the book. I really like it. I like Dick's way of exploring kind of themes about society and about the makeup of a society. In this case, one that's supposedly a colony on another planet. I've no doubt that, and I caught the end of what Susanna said there. I've no doubt that people and a lot of the conversation can center on some of the, let's say, some of the scientific elements of the story. I think in both ways, both about space travel, but all of that kind of stuff, but about the neurological kind of the thoughts and conditions that he sort of made the centerpiece of some of the storytelling. I crucially think he is not using it as a comment on those conditions or otherwise, but rather sort of it's like a platform because of maybe the lack of understanding of those conditions at the time, to just kind of say, right, here's a jumping off point kind of for me to tell my story, because there's plenty we probably don't know about that. And I think in some way, I think he was sort of accepting that there was ignorance about it, if that makes sense, because of kind of how he approaches it, if you know what I mean.
That makes sense. I was saying earlier that the words, I had started to say that things don't quite mean what I think they mean, the way he was using them. So I had to almost like pretend like he's using a different word altogether and move past that. But once I did, it's like either the definitions of their time or some stuff that he added on his own. And there was, I almost read it like it was a bit of a world building aspect. Like, this is how people like this behave, and then move on from this. But I can see how that could feel like it's out of its time and maybe even offensive if it's not current with the current psychological beliefs or science, I guess.
Mhm. Yeah, I think one of the key lines in here is what the grandfather Leo says. He says that when I was a boy, there was no mental illness like there is now, and I've heard that just about in every decade of my life. And so it's just like, yeah, because people didn't know about it, or it wasn't diagnosed properly because the science wasn't there yet. But it's funny that it's coming from the grandfather, because that's how he's relating um, his his lack of knowledge from when he was growing up, and to his son Jack, and then further on down the line to his son David, and it just kind of summed up the you know the lack of knowledge that was about the whole psychology of all these characters at the time, and it kind of fit with the story in that way, and that Dick was exploring this stuff without really knowing a ton about it. He was exploring it in a way to suit his story and make his story moved along, which the story itself, like I said, I thought was moved along fairly well. It was a compelling story for what it was. Like I said, once you get past the some of the stuff that could be offensive, and try to deal with that, but it's like you had to put a caveat on the book cover or something like that, and you can enjoy this story if you want, and because it is, I think his writing's good. I think, like Susanna said, I think his characterization isn't always that deep,
Mhm.
uh, but he does plot a good story.
And there were some interesting elements, like the whole thing on the school. That was just mind blowing. The idea of having the robots that were always static characters meant to educate without teaching. And I thought that concept should have been a story on its own. And we could have explored that far more, especially because he was also implying that if you keep the setting and keep, so you have the setting maintaining through time, which will be the school, and the same teachers over and over, therefore the kids should have the same mindset. That was roughly what he was planning. I thought it was a story worth exploring on its own only. He always has, like, I think, those sub themes on the books that he writes, and some of them end up being quite compelling.
This did feel like the parts that explode the robot and stuff. Like, I think there was a brief suggestion of some of the themes from Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I almost wondered if the Mars colony that's referenced is the same as this one. Like a little bit. No, I don't think it was, because I think the timeline for androids is before 94. I think it's sometime in the 80s, if I remember
But
correctly. But
Electric Sheep was published on the 68. I think it's after this one. So probably the ideas here inspired him on the
maybe.
other book.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes
Yeah,
sense.
can see that.
Yeah.
You can also see, putting through some of the things, this idea of consciousness and about existence, and I think one of the things that I definitely could relate to in terms of how he portrayed kind of Manfred's character, and like to your point, Forsha, about this characterization of schizophrenia, but it's not really schizophrenia. What he's talking about in those characters, it's kind of its own thing, is that people perceive the world in different ways, regardless of how each other see it. And I think towards the end of the book, you kind of get the sense that Artie couldn't accept that things were different. He kind of got himself very confused. That one, it was very black and white. It was very much he was in it or he wasn't in it, and he thought that his role should have been in a controlling aspect as to what happened there. So he kind of thought, by his understanding, he would have control of it and be able to use it in a very, bad way as he won. He's one of the most unlikable characters I think I've ever read. Like, in a lot of ways, he's really just, there's very little redeeming about Artie as a character at all. So I really like that exploration of existence, and then especially towards the end when we see Manny, what he became towards the end. I think Dick's very good at kind of plopping these ideas that, as Livia said, could be expanded out in lots of different directions. I think that's what makes his writing so compelling, is because every sort of idea feels like it connects to something else that we could explore. And there's another book in that somewhere,
Yeah. It does feel like there's a lot of it's not just about that one thing. There is a central focus, but there are all these other elements and I think we talked about that a little bit in discussing Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep as well. But I wanted to talk about the bit about the empathy a bit more. Like, I don't have a sense either way that it's not very empathetic towards, say, people with psychological illnesses or the other way around. But I do want to explore the aspects that to me seemed like they were in the direction of suggesting that at least Dick was empathetic, because, like, in the end, Manfred finds a group of people who understand him, who he can communicate with, and so it almost, I don't know if this was his intention, but it almost feels like everybody needs someone who understands them and they'll be fine, versus like where they are just locked up and try to fix them for society, versus giving them a group of people that they can actually hang out with and be around and understand. And I think there was one other thing like about the yeah, okay, let's talk about that first. Like was there, and I think the fact that like Jack is kind of a likable character, but Arnie, who has all these opinions about everybody, is Arnie or Artie, I forget, but anyway, who
Funny, I can't remember either.
is not.
Just to clarify, I didn't say, or I didn't meant that the author was unempathetic, that lacked empathy. The writing style, the way that the story is constructed, the way that the characters connect, deal with each other, lacks that empathy to help the reader connect with the characters as well, but also to connect the story together. That's why, for me, it felt disjointed, because it felt just these events happening out of, almost nowhere, or just completely unrelated to each other. There was no cohesion in my head. But I'm not saying that Philip is unempathetic.
Oh no, sorry.
Yes, not. Just to clarify, just in case.
I didn't mean to imply that that's what you said. I just used the keyword as a jumping off point. Sorry, but yeah, Chris, you were saying something.
Yeah, I think a lot of that's intentional actually in this book, because I think for definitely about the first 80 or 100 pages, I get very strong World War II vibes out of this book, about this idea of colonialism and about like this kind of utopic society, and that in its own way the colony of Mars was about kind of creating this utopian society, and we should need to prune off the bits that aren't part of the system, which kind of leads to the suicide in its own way of this conflict of a father who has a child that is on the fringes of society that they're talking about pruning off, and he has the thought that actually that's actually better for this society that we're trying to build, and he has a horror at himself, and that kind of spirals out. And he's not the only person, because it happens this way along that people are part of a process or a colony that needs to be the best that it can. It needs more people to survive, and therefore it talks about Jews. It talks about ethnicity quite a lot at the start of it, and about the things that divide. And I think it's funny how certainly I was reading along thinking about the neurological parts of it, but actually the portrayal of racism, the portrayal of sexism, I think, within society are very, very prevalent within it, that are like an undercurrent. And it's almost like the reader accepts that kind of stuff at a base level because it was very much of the time, probably when it was written, but it's kind of a bit more drawn into the neurological representation of people rather than doing it. And it's that kind of lens at which you look at society and go, there's a lot of horrors in society that we just accept because they've always been like that. And attitudes to certain things, and we kind of go, well, that's okay, and it's all right, and this stuff's weird, not as acceptable because it's sort of new, and like society doesn't understand it as a whole, if that makes any sense. What I'm saying, it's a very colonial, I think, idea of kind of going in and changing what you have, changing the indigenous population, in this case the Bleakmen, and kind of using them and othering them, and then taking the aspects of your society that you bring, in this case these neurological conditions that came across with people that they just don't understand, and kind of grouping them with the indigenous population, and kind of then saying we know better, this people that are left. So I think that lack of empathy in the writing is definitely there. I totally agree with Susanna there, but I think it sort of is intentional in some ways, because it is not a utopian society at all. It is very a problematic society.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I reckon, again, comparing both books, the first one I thought it was very clever because it was a book about empathy. But now when I saw the same pattern, I was like, well, okay, so I guess he knows his style, he knows his strengths. And again, he constructed the story that fits his... I only read these two, so I might be wrong, or it's just these two. But it does seem that he's using it as a strength to create something that it is different. Might not be for everyone. I found it very hard to read. Couldn't get the narrator going, but many people love it, so he did something right.
There were some other interesting a- aspects like that I couldn't figure out. We were talking earlier about how it's hard to tell, like from the portrayal of characters. For instance, Norbert Steiner, when the refrigerator mom theory is sort of exposited through him, right? But he's not a very likable character, so it's unclear whether he's like reflecting the author's opinions or if like the author's commenting on them, right? Similarly with the psychologist, when he has just like this thinking, uh whoever he meets, he's like sort of internally classifying them into groups. He even has a classification for himself, and he's like, oh, he's sort of looking at himself externally and saying, I have already classified myself as this person, so I can't be behaving this way. And so using it as a justification for wanting to take revenge on Arnie Cott. Uh, but again, like that guy was also very interesting to read because it's again unclear. It doesn't feel. I'm not sure whether it's a commentary on people like them who think this way, or if it's just random words he's putting in their mouth to make the character interesting.
I think I think I don't know if I don't think Philip is putting his opinion on the pages. I think he's pointing out a lot of things about society at the time that was an opinionated, overarching view at the time, and he's throwing that into the story to say, "Here's this," and he's just leaving it there. He's saying, "What do you think about it?" Here's this. What do you think about it? Here is, and I don't think he's presenting an opinion as so much as presenting a bunch of uh, settings for the time he wrote it, and I think it's up to us to get
Yeah.
out of that what
Yeah, and it's also like, as you said, every character in here is so judgmental. Like everyone have very strong opinions, and sometimes you can get two characters which have opposing opinions on the same issue, even if they never meet. It's like, but everyone has an opinion and everyone voices it. That's the other thing. There are always scenes in which they are actively telling their opinion to someone else, not only thinking it. Not sure if he was having, as an author, trying to put up the limelight on the need of people to, be vocal or be vocal in places in which it wasn't needed. Like between the two friends, Sylvia and the other lady, I forgot her name, like they were even having like contradicting opinions. And at some point, like they will accept something or just, judge everyone else. And that happens with every character. It happens more with Arnie, but he's despicable and he has opinions about everything. I'm not sure if he's trying to leverage that as another side of belonging. People tend to join groups or to express their opinions, to find people that is like-minded, right? And we tend to find people that is like-minded because that's a way of belonging, right? To have our own group and so on. So I'm not sure if he wasn't trying to showcase that aspect or that need to share one's opinion and have someone agreeing with us, regardless of what the opinion is. Because in the book, everyone has opinions about everything,
It's funny
Yeah.
that as bad as Arnie was, they still all wanted to be around him at a certain point, and it was just like, this guy's bad news, and yet you still wanna. He's still gonna say, "All right, I'm still going to work for him. I still want to interact with him at the copter site there." And it was just kind of it's kind of funny that you pointed that out, that they all expressed their opinions, and of course that's that may be the author's way of showing what he's seen in life, people expressing that kind of stuff. And but it's very interesting that, yeah, that's a neat way of looking at it.
Well, I think that's a good thing. People should be more honest, and and it's great when you find someone who you can talk to freely, and I think they gravitated towards him because he was genuine. He wasn't nice, but he was authentic. And that's refreshing too. But there's some bits here. The light is crap, so I can't quite read properly. But it didn't hold back. Like everyone had an opinion, and it was usually bad. And some of them, it's like, wow, I can't believe you actually put this on the page. Well done. So it really looks like it was trying to. It's very blunt at times. It was pointed. I don't know what he was exactly pointing at. If it was trying to get the reader upset or to create this, people discussing the book. But yeah, it was very, very pointed. It didn't hold back. Some of them is like, wow. But this is a sort of saying that I guess these days we keep it to ourselves. We don't express our opinions as often or in public or as succinctly, I guess. And maybe it was something that was starting back then. And now I'm here thinking that's why he set it up in Mars. This was a new colony. This was a small community isolated from, the main planet. So maybe they had to be more honest to each other, or they had that freedom. I don't know. They were dealing with things that no one on Earth would have to deal with, like the Blickman, like the completely different environment. And it's that sort of harshness, that sort of alienation causes people to try to find like-minded people and express themselves in unconventional ways.
Yeah, that does that. Yeah, it reminds me of the that pioneer aspect that you brought up earlier.
Yeah.
And in that kind of pioneering society, you would have much stronger opinionated people who were trying to build a society, and in Arnie's case, control it. Because he had a bigger grip on the workings of the whole place, and that you definitely ran into that in the Old West pioneering type of situations, and in other pioneering situations around the world too. So that it kind of makes sense, and it kind of it puts a lot of it once again, we're looking into one of these books, this Sci-Fi Masterworks, and we're gleaning a lot more out of it by delving into a discussion on it than just reading it on our own, because I totally didn't quite grasp onto that pioneering aspect until now, and how it affects people psychologically, and how it affects how they go about their daily lives, until it's there, it's in the subconscious, but now it's like, oh yeah, right, it's starting to come out, and like, oh yeah, he's starting to realize these things as you have discussions like this, and that's pretty cool.
Yeah, and something that struck me now that you mention is it's another similarity with Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, in which the society is always missing something they left behind or they no longer have, and in this case, it may tie up with the pioneering aspect. In Do Androids, we have the animals. Like everyone wants an animal that is alive because they only have the machines and so on. And in this one, it's a food. Like they have this whole operation to bring food illegally from Earth. That's very fancy, and you have at the same time the contradiction. They left Earth for a reason, but they still keep missing or longing for things from Earth. In this case, fancy food and all of that. So it's like humanity is never that we always lack something. We always miss what we don't have. We long for something, and once we have that, then there is something else we are still longing for. And I found it was another somewhat similar connection to Android's Dream of Electric Sheep, that idea of prioritizing something that's very simplistic for the day-to-day life, because we wouldn't put up privilege, compare privilege to owning a pet nowadays, like it happened there, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
That was quite amusing. That every time Arnie encountered somebody new, he's like, "Oh, try this. This is great."
Yeah, but good points, and that was especially point accurate with what's her name, the wife. She was always fantasizing. She was bored. She was always fantasizing
Yeah.
about Sylvia. Yes, about an affair, and then she has an affair. And the moment she has an affair, oh no, no, this is not
Yeah.
what I want at
Yeah, I
all.
do. Yeah.
It's just constant.
Yeah, but it's
Crazy.
a bit like again, like the Android Stream. Both of these features are both dystopian. You know, this is not a wonderful version of the future that is great. This is a very, very poor society. This Martian society, everybody is lacking basic things in your
Water.
own life, and even though water in this case, and that people they talk even about the person who basically rediverted the canal so they could live, you know, in luxury with all loads of water, and how the injustice of that, but because they had enough money and enough influence, they were just allowed to do it. And I think there's a big discussion in this book about capitalism, just in general, Arnie being that person, and the fact that it's not that everybody wants to be around it, but everybody sees that the only way to improve their situation is through his influence and his money. Like if you look at the psychologist, he's very much, oh, this is my future self. If I could just be on his payroll, then I'll be able to have the life, and I'll have some of this, you know, be able to like buy Black Label Jack Daniels. You know, these are big aims that are very much like a capitalist society. It's not that they're wanting, you know, better standard of living. It's luxury goods is what they're really looking for. And the black market trade is in luxury goods and about nicer foods, and has been said, things that they left behind beforehand. It's foods that have been imported from Earth at extortionate prices, and people are like, "Oh my god, this is amazing," in its own right. So it's this dystopian kind of feature is just painted, and then Manfred sees obviously the buildings from the UN that are going to be deteriorate over time. This recruit to get more people there is just going to be left to be an old person's home at the end of them. So essentially showing a dying society in Mars, even though it's sort of burgeoning in its own way.
Yeah, that was pretty grim. That the future that little Manfred saw there.
Yeah, I thought that whole bit was very interesting, and I think that was the part of the book that made me decide I really like it. The way Manfred sees the end of all things, and to a certain extent, that's what Jack sees as well. Like in his psychotic breaks, like he sees the machines deteriorating, and 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 then like if you're grappling with that on a constant basis, why what can you ever say, right? So I think for a 10-year-old to deal with that, that's immense. uh but I thought it was the end of all things. Maybe it's because, but the bleak man later tells us that it's actually the end of his own life that he's seeing on a constant basis, uh which, yeah, I think that the connection back there then to why the FDR mountain was when he started drawing and expressing what he saw. I thought that was very interesting. But yeah, just that whole aspect of what constantly grappling with the fact that everything we build is going to deteriorate can do to someone. I think that was really interesting. There's something someone said earlier that I wanted to follow up on, but I can't remember what it was. So I guess we can start a new topic. uh, what did you think of the wife, like the relationships in this book, the wife and the mistress and Jack? That whole thing was interesting, wasn't it? And the and the explanation that her friend gives about having, about why they should have affairs so that they can figure out how best to have their make the relationship with their husbands go. Like, who's losing in this?
Yeah, that seems. It almost seems another one of those antiquated ideas that that Philip was throwing on the page to say, "What do you think about this too?" It's at first you can be a little, you can be thrown off by it, but then once you read into it, you can say, okay, he's asking the question. He's saying this is what society may be like in some aspects of the time we live in. What do you think about it? And he's, I think it goes back to the old adage that Chris has said before, that science fiction isn't actually about the future; it's about the now. It's about right where we're living and how we're living right now. And and I think that's just yet another aspect that he's saying, here's what I saw now. I'm putting it into this story. What do you think about it? And yeah, I don't think it's a very good mirror to what he's seen in what he might consider suburban mom life back then. And fortunately, I hope it's not the same today. but but that's, you know, other than that, it was amusing. There was a lot of amusing stuff to that went along with that part of the story. And it was, I'm not sure how much it served the story per se, other than being more stuff that he could point out about the society of the time. Uh, I think the story was served in a exciting manner, more with Arnie's situation and Manfred and Jack and their whole relationship. But I think I wish the female
Mm.
characters could have been a little more involved and a little bit better
Yeah.
better written.
Yeah, they were very
Yeah.
one note, one concern, pretty much. The- I disagree that that was how things were at the time, and they aren't like that now. I think they still are. I think in the way he was saying, you can move planets or whatever, you can change your environment, but human nature remains the same. People will get bored in marriage or whatever, and they will. It doesn't matter how much we learn or how much we entertain ourselves. Gossip is always going to exist, always going to be gossip. We
Yeah,
always pay attention to these things, and who's sleeping with who's wearing that, who's going where. Especially if it's a small community, everyone knows everything and everyone talks. It's their main entertainment. It doesn't matter how many channels they have. Talking about the neighbors and
yeah,
speculating about their lives is
yeah.
always
It
prime.
just takes a different vehicle these days than it did back then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And there is also with regards to Sylvia, at the end, I wasn't really sure whether she wanted an affair just to experience it or to tell her friend that she had an affair. Because
Oh,
it's like, yeah, she immediately after the fact, she's saying, like, oh, but if my friend finds out, she's going to turns on a light and calls her friend and tells her everything. Like, and
Yeah.
I think PKD was a lot of the time within the characters exploring motivation. Why do they do something in the way they do it? And he wasn't giving the answer, just like with the case of Sylvia and the affair. He was just putting up the scene there for the readers to think. Because, for example, I think it was Jack Bolan, the engineer who is fixing things, he changes motivations quite a lot throughout the book. Like he has a different goal to do different things. And a lot of the time he's actually ruminating about his own motives to do something in the past. And that happens a lot with quite a lot of the characters. So I thought it was perhaps another exploration, another of those open questions that appear in the book. You just have the facts. You have to have, it's like he was teasing the readers to be judgmental, to actually put up an opinion on why the characters have a motivation or why they are doing things, these characters who are also so judgmental.
Yeah, it kind of goes in line with what Jared said, that the moment they have something, they wanted something else and something else. You know, the motivation changes. You know what they want something. They are looking for something. They get it. Something else. Not quite, something else. And then they justify their changes in tastes, in goals. We do that all the time throughout our lives, I guess, one way or the other. How many times, I really want that. You buy it and then, yeah, that was a mistake.
I think the female characters are actually potentially the most interesting characters in the story. I think actually the male characters are they are just one thing essentially the way through. And actually in a lot of cases, they are influenced by female characters' actions. So like Doreen is basically the person that holds the power in this entire story over both Arnie and Jack in a lot of ways. She comes up with the best ideas, and rather than just being this, as she's presented at the start, as being this kind of character there's a sexual character, that's pretty much her introduction into the story. She actually becomes somebody that drives and manipulates the positions throughout the book, in terms of, her deciding that she wanted to be with Jack, her deciding, or trying to manipulate the fact that Jack shouldn't go to Arnie's that night because it was obviously going to end badly. Her decision to influence how they get to the, whatever you call that place in the FDR plot, the dinky whatever that it was called. Yeah, that place out there. So she says use this vehicle rather than, says that's a good idea. And then you have Sylvia, who again, her character is for me about this empowerment to basically say she isn't just a bystander in society and in their life as a family. Like, she is sort of just waiting for Jack to come home to her in some ways, but by having her affair and reiterated towards the end, she says, I have a choice in this as well. This isn't just about you deciding what you want and whether you're going to come back to the family. I can change, and I'm in control of my own life and make that decision for myself. So and I think you talked about this very briefly last night, Jared, if this was made into a TV series, which I think could be excellent, I think the drawn out of those female perspectives are the bit that would make the TV show great. Because even the character of Ernest Steiner, her journey of the husband killing himself, being left with the kids, having this son who is sort of the center story, and then him coming back in the end. And at the end of the book, the basically last thing is she runs out and can't cope with it anymore. I think her character and her story is actually one that you might actually base the whole show around if you were to reframe the story in another way, and it could be really, really interesting in that way. I think that perspective and that take in the story might be like a great way to go for it.
I just realized something when I was talking about women being one note. I did not include her. I wasn't, like, in my head, I wasn't even thinking of her as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
That's weird. I just realized that now. Clever. And he does describe her as being, very masculine, but so
that's right.
Yeah, clever. So he wrote her kind of like a man, but intentionally, or just made the other women very, very girly to. No, now I'm going to be thinking about this. It's just quiet.
I actually in this case don't give Dick an awful lot of credit for that. I don't think, like, going back between this and Deandra's Dream and some of the other stuff that Dick. I don't think he generally writes female characters very well. There's generally not an awful lot of depth to them. I think in this case, he just created a set of circumstances that made the female's character's life interesting, if you know what I mean. And I think those are the bits where you can kind of look at and go, actually, them being at the center of that and representing them in the way it did makes her an interesting character rather than him writing her, because she's still very much a fringe character in the story. You don't really see her. In fact, a lot of the time she's off screen in the story and kind of has a role somewhere outside.
Yeah, I think in both these books, I felt like, and I'm not sure if I'm projecting or if this is actually how he wrote them, but I felt almost a disdainful feeling from like he wrote the females with an almost disdainful feeling towards them. Not all of them, like the wives in both stories. They weren't like they were. The opening of both stories was the wife wanting some sort of drug to escape, right? Which is interesting. And when you see that kind of thing multiple times, maybe it starts to reflect the author's opinion of like you need to escape from your daily life and whatnot. So that aspect of it feels almost like a disdainful opinion of these women, not maybe all women in general, but like these particular women, the housewives that he's writing about. But I have to think about that a bit more because they just felt withdrawn from the world and distant and like they were wishing they were anywhere else, both the women, so from androids and in this book.
Yeah, I was telling Chris last night that I think if this was rewritten as a series for today, maybe on a television series or something like that, and you gave the women characters a bit more agency, and it gave several of the characters actually a bit more agency and a bit more character, it could actually be a very compelling show and quite interesting, especially updated with all the advances we've made in cognitive awareness. And so it could be something if it was redone.
It would be a lot more fun if they were faithful to the book, to the opinions. Just for comparison.
Yeah.
Just go madman on it. I think that would work better.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Varsha, with regards to what you said, I went to check, and it's also like both books end the same. So they both start with the wife taking drugs, and Do Androids ends with the wife calling the repairmans for the frog that he had while he's out and zoned out. And this one ends with the wife, I think, preparing the meal, preparing something for him and calling him out as well. So it's very similar, and I'm not sure if it means something, but it's also another connection that when you mentioned, I actually thought it was a very similar structure from the ending to the start. Yeah.
And the male character's journey is similar to, right? Like they go off, they go grazing elsewhere, and then they come back home to their wife. And the wife, meanwhile, is having her own adventure, and that somehow makes them. I don't remember if this was a thing in androids. I expect it probably was. When they find out about the affair, it makes them more protective or like want the wife more. I don't know. So
there is another similar scene because I don't recall Do Androids exactly, but there is one scene in which he comes back and she gives him another perspective by putting him into the empathy machine. Right. And in this one, there is a similar scene in which Jacques comes home and she gives him another perspective by discussing the affair and clearing the affair. So it's like you have these 3 points that are similar between both books.
Yeah. That is interesting. Yeah. What is he writing about there?
Yeah.
Not sure if it was intentional or this one inspired the other. So
it definitely does feel like he has similar things to say in a lot of his stories, and as we said, he's not totally clear about it. It's not like it's the same thing he beats it over over the head with. He just sort of gives you an indication these are things that he's thinking about,
Hmm.
and putting them on the page and letting you explore them as the reader. And his books, while this one has a plot definitely, and one you can follow in a story, you go, they're really deep thematically. You know, that's really what they're about. They're perusing on ideas and things, and as a probably I said thing to Parsha last night, it might be, but just because he was just taking so many drugs that he couldn't actually pull it all together at that time. You know, he just kind of was so full of ideas and things on the page, and he was less concerned with making it all make sense than just kind of, oh, I have another idea, and just kind of going in that direction.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all there. You figured it out. I'm not gonna go deep into it. No, I have to move on to the next scene. Okay, you figured it out. Yeah, it's the structure of the book pretty much. So.
Which is quite similar to what the characters actually do. Like they are always doing the same, moving from one motivation to the other.
Yeah. And it is interesting. Like there are bits that are common to a lot of the characters too, like all of them. And I think one of you mentioned this before too, but they all have indulge in some version of blaming other people for their problems or using other people's doings as motivation or as justification for their own behavior. Like Arnie Cott does this a whole lot. It's like, oh, Steiner shouldn't have died if he didn't want me to get into the black market business. Like ridiculous, the levels to which he goes to blame other people for his problems. But Sylvia, that was another interesting aspect to her, which again, like I don't know how I feel about it, but it's just as a connecting point to blame other people for your problems. There's in the beginning of the book, she's like, Jack's never home. I'd feel better if he's home. And then later on, it's he's home all the time. Now I'm upset that he's home all the time, and I don't know what to do with my life because he's home all the time. So just like their lack of unhappiness, lack of happiness, finding external explanations for that, I thought was interesting. And I think Jack didn't indulge himself in that, as far as I remember, but Steiner did at the beginning. Like, I think Jared was talking about how the beginning of the book, like, you had to really push past some stuff that felt unpalatable. I think Steiner going on about how unhappy he was about the fact that he had this autistic child and then blaming his wife for it. Yeah, and I think that's thinking about it that way, maybe that's telling us how PKD feels about the refrigerator mom theory. I don't know, like if you find the connecting dots in terms of blaming other people for your problems. But anyway, that was interesting. And anyway, my larger point with all of this was like there are just these like simple parts to the story that riffing off of what you guys were saying about so many ideas. There are things that you could go down a rabbit hole and expand and think about a lot more with just a little bit of the connecting points, I think.
Yeah, that's very good. That's very good, Basha. I like that. The characters blaming other things for their own problems. It really resonates, I think, throughout the whole book with all the characters. Yeah.
Yeah. And in some cases, it's actually truth because there are the way the POVs are chained, there is always someone who takes an action or does something and it ends up having repercussions on the other characters, like Steiner killing himself. It ends up a lot of other it has a lot of consequences that affect a lot of people. So sometimes the complaints are actually correct, like they are complaining. But as a reader, because we have that omniscient perspective, we can see that, yeah, there is a connection there. In other cases, it's just pure nonsense.
Yeah.
So I think it also, it was also an attempt, at least how I see it, to showcase how people are interrelated, because at the end of the day, people within a society will make decisions that will unwillingly and unknowingly to them affect other people, right? Suppose that somebody, I don't know, took the dog out, the dog pooped, someone slept there, someone had that type of chaining. It seems very innocent, but he was doing it here. And he was also linking it to the constant complaining of the characters.
Yeah, yeah. And I think Susanna, you were talking about how disconnected the book felt, but it does start in a very disconnected way, doesn't it? Like it's just all of these random people who you can't quite figure out how they all tie in together. We start with Sylvia, okay, and then we move on to Jack, who's her husband, cool. And then but there are like tiny connecting bits though. Then Jack has a thought as he's flying over Lewiston that it's all controlled by Arnie, and then the next perspective we get, excuse me, is Arnie. So there are like little connecting points, but it's still like, what? Why did we go from reading about this person to reading about this person? And they do
Mm.
all come together really well, but yeah, it does start off, I think, in a rather disconnected fashion. So I maybe understand why you may have felt that way. But and did he do that in androids also, start with a lot of disconnected perspectives? But I think we knew why we were following each character, because he was looking for specific individuals, and then we were following the perspective of those individuals. But this one just felt very, here's a character, here's another character, and now I'll tell you how they all come together.
Yeah, and I usually enjoy that sort of thing. I think it was more how the book was organized. Like you said, it does make sense in the end. And I kept reading, and then eventually, okay, and, there's a method to this madness. Great, but it was there were moments where I was just going, where are you going with this? Why am I reading about this person now? Go back. I want to know more about that one. It wasn't an enjoyable read because of it, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I'm sort of surprised it came together cohesively in the end. Like I was like the one thing I wasn't expecting from the book, that it actually ended some way.
I don't know if you can see. So these are the marks where I had issues with. So many, and then towards the end, there's no marks because I stopped having issues.
Did anybody else? Sorry, go ahead.
No. I was just agreeing.
I was saying, did anybody else get taken in by the misprint chapter numbers?
Yeah. For a moment, I was like, "Oh, so that's what you're doing. The chapters are out of order."
Yes,
actually,
that's what I thought. And then I was so disappointed that they just printed 6 as 9. So this edition, Jared, it has chapter 6 is printed as chapter 9 for some reason. So chapter numbers go 5, 9, 7, 8, 9. And I thought he was doing some time slip thing there, like we're going back and forth in the past.
Same thing. No, disappointing.
And then I checked in the Kindle book, and that one has the chapter numbers in order. And I'm like, damn it. I thought he was doing something so cool here. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but he does it narratively. Like, regardless of whether the things go, he does present the things out of order. And you're wondering, again, we're left wondering what is real and what is not real, what is kind of perspective, and which one is this like a dreamlike state or otherwise. It's very clever.
Oh, yeah. I think, thank you for bringing that up. I wanted to talk about the real and not real aspects, which again, I think resonate from androids. I think we're reading them in the reverse publication order, but this also grapples with that quite a bit, right? And the whole trip that Arnicott had, he took drugs before he quote unquote went back in the past. So for all we know, he may have just had a vision and he didn't actually go in the past. So anyway, there's this question of what are they seeing, what's real, are we in the present time? And I think that's what it ends on in the end, right? The thing that Jack is grappling with, what makes him start to feel disconnected from the world is that maybe this stuff isn't real, and it's really weighing on him towards the end. So
yeah, there's kind of a moral lesson at the end too, that kind of that be careful what you wish for aspect of do you really want to know your future? Do you really want to know that? Because and you don't. That's the whole lesson of that part of it. Is you actually don't want to know, because that would be a bad thing. That would be something that would mess with your head, and it would affect your actions. And so that was like the kind of the lesson that he imparted into the narrative, on top of all the other stuff where he threw in to say, "You think about it yourself. Here's the lesson I'm giving you, but you think about the rest yourself." And so it was neat. Like I said, I liked the last 70 pages. I thought those flew by faster, and I thought they were a bit more exciting, and they were a bit more
Mhm.
plot driven, in that sense. And so it was good.
Mm.
It's good stuff.
What What did you all think of the um, repetition in that scene, the
Mm.
3 times over from different perspectives? That part was, I thought, brilliant. And
Yeah.
yeah, sorry, go ahead, Livia.
No, I at the start when I started reading that I was a bit confused because I didn't catch what he was doing immediately, and at the same time it always starts the same. He gives you some clues, like for example the dialogue or something like that tie in, but he always changes something every time that it happens in each cycle. There is something that changes, and he doesn't tell you afterwards which one is what really happened. It's like you have to figure out on your own which ones of the 3 repetitions is the one that endured past and which were just, because there is like an insinuation at some point that Manfred was actually going back and changing and actively looking for a different outcome.
Hmm.
I thought it was a bit open to interpretation in that part.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that bit was brilliant because obviously we see the scene multiple times, but also when it comes to it putting it in chronology, our character can't remember what happened.
Yeah.
He loses memory about it. So again, you can either insert which version that you like, or you can kind of think, well, maybe none of those things happened.
Mm.
And it'll be something that I'll come to in a second for sure. But this idea of who actually is in control of this time thing or who's causing it, I think is at the root of the book, because I think the way they present it and what actually is happening is never really explored or talked about by the end of the book. It's left very unclear as to actually what's going on,
Mm.
to me anyway.
Well, how would you explain it? I think if you try to actually explain something concrete out of it, we wouldn't be here discussing it.
Mhm.
So it's
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, let them figure it out. It's all in there somewhere, figure it out.
Yeah, and it goes back to the various notions that we've discussed, right? Like this idea that both Jack and Arnie have, that Manfred is controlling the time or controlling outcomes of events. With Jack, you almost start to believe it because he is a lot more empathetic towards the boy than Arnie is. Arnie, like, I just want to disagree. Well, I just wanted to disagree with everything he was saying. So it's like, okay, are you guys just making extreme conclusions about how, like, you want to blame other people for what's happening to you? So you're saying, oh, Manfred, he's the problem, he's controlling the outcomes. Or is that actually true? Does he actually in fact have those powers? So yeah, I think it is all very loose and open-ended, and you could draw whatever conclusions you wanted. And I the interesting thing is things would change a lot or not change at all depending on which ones you choose or what you think the actual underlying cause was.
Mm. I think it's also part of that intention from the author to force the reader to have an opinion, just like the characters have an opinion.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Because it's like you have these 3 things and it's up to you what you think, but it's
Mhm.
forcing you to think an opinion and believe which one of those happened and who caused it as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it's going back to that idea of everyone complaining or everyone having an effect on other people's life, depending on which version on which chapter you choose to take as a correct one, as a what truly happened, the events afterwards can change meaning because
Yeah.
there are different connections and they are done in a very open way. Again, just gluing into dialogue that doesn't actually limit the option to one, it leaves it open enough.
Yeah. And you could, and the thing I love about these kinds of stories is you could draw mundane interpretations, like Jack and Manfred, they just have visions, right? Or it could be that they in fact see the future. Or the guy Arnie, he took a drug and went back in time, or he took a drug and had a vision with it. So it is interesting. Like you could have the supernatural or the mundane explanation, and both would work just as well. You can choose the red pill or the blue pill. Did I get the
Yeah.
colors right?
It's in its own way like not great science, because they kind of look at things and go, oh well, that's like that, so that must cause this. It's like weird kind. So Manfred's very different, and he goes into a trance-like state, and at the same time we're kind of doing this time jumping, so it must be Manfred. It must be because he's different. And that's not right. Same with their kind of their schizophrenia. What they're diagnosing as schizophrenia is that their episodes seem to come over them randomly and then not be there for a long time, and then they go, well, that's been caused by the schizophrenia or this condition. But again, I think there's enough evidence in the book to suggest that that's probably not the case, because it starts to happen then to Arnie as well, who isn't a diagnosed schizophrenic or otherwise, but they're talking about these kind of long distance that the travel approach in Mars is causing these neurological conditions, whereas they just don't understand the world they're in well enough, I think, to actually make that kind of very definite conclusion.
Yeah. Do you think that corresponds to some industrial activity in the 60s that maybe people were blaming mental illnesses on, just like he's like the characters in the book blame the travel to Mars?
Well, we have a very good example of it. The
Interesting. Yeah.
the vaccine theory of autism, that they spent so much time investing in saying was true, and then no time together on debunking it and actually showing, actually, we proved this wasn't true. The amount of people that, if you go around anywhere in the world that still think that is true today, is ridiculous. Phenomenal. Yeah.
Yeah. Was there anything else that we haven't talked about yet?
I think we're good.
Yeah,
I'm kind of curious, actually, because we noticed a lot of the similarities between this book and Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I'm wondering, because we're reading Alfred Bester again next month, and I'm wondering if we're going to see the same similarities that we did with we're reading The Demolished Man. And
yes, that's right. Yep.
What was the last one?
Yeah.
The
Stars My Destination.
Right. So I'm wondering if we'll see the same similarities with those two novels, and it'd be interesting experiment coming up here, I think.
Yeah.
I hope so. I kind of like that one.
I started reading it. It does have some similarities. So structures or changes.
Nice.
So yeah.
Very nice. That one was a Count of Monte Cristo retelling. Is it? Yeah. All right, then let's do outros. Jared again.
Me again. I am at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and I am on plenty of podcasts associated with pagechewing.com, including Speculative Speculations. Next.
Susanna?
You can you can find me on my YouTube channel, Den of the Weirds, on X as Chronodendron, and on the Page Chewing forums. You can find my books pretty much everywhere. I have a new novella out that it's only available on Amazon. So it's a prequel to To Trick a Trickster. Check it out. It's free on Kindle Unlimited.
Nice. Livia.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for hosting the discussions. It always changes my opinion of some books sometimes. So it's always great. And yeah, you can find me on almost every social site as Livia J. Elliott. I host a podcast, Books Undone, which you can find in any podcasting platform, including YouTube. And my books are available on Amazon, but you can also get the ebook for free by signing to my newsletter. And my interactive fiction is available to read for free through the app Unearth the Stories for Android or iOS. So thank you.
Me.
You're left.
My name's Chris Mohan. I'm on the Chronicle Across YouTube channel and those podcasts that Jared talked about, like Speculative Speculations. I am not mentioning that X platform at all because I think social media should all die in its own right.
Yes. Oh man. And you can find me on the YouTube channel Reading by the Rainy Mountain, and the podcast Speculative Speculations, like these other two mentioned, and hanging out on the Patreon forum, where if you'd like to join us on these discussions, you can sign up and I don't know, send me a message or something, and I'll point you to the right places to get set up to join these discussions either here or on the forum. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you again next month with The Demolished Man by Alfred Bester. Bye.